Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Building Regulations Q&A. This week, we are looking at... What are we looking at this week? You've lost my slide.
Work on existing high-risk buildings.
Exactly. The slide just jumped down there for a second. So we're going to jump straight to the questions. So Christopher asks, what is the process where work has been completed on a HRB? Work started 2018, but the company hasn't yet notified BSR regarding completion. They missed the cutoff date in April.
If work has been completed and you don't have a completion certificate.
Where work has been completed on a HRB, the work started in 2018, but the company haven't yet notified BSR regarding completion.
They wouldn't. They would be carrying on under the existing. Generally, the transitional arrangements. They'd be carrying under the existing arrangements. They wouldn't necessarily need to notify the BSR unless their approved inspector went must cease to trade or something unusual would happen. So it's the best I can answer. I think. Andrew, any thoughts?
Well, it very much depends on what the building control situation was. In 2018, if the work was started, then the building control would probably be the local authority. And therefore, I don't think the building control arrangements change unless there is an issue in the transitional arrangements apply. So I think this probably got in before there was a need to involve the regulator. But we don't know the full detail, so that's probably as good as we can answer at this moment. If Christopher wants to get in touch by email, then with some more detail, I'm happy to have a look at it.
Yeah, Christopher, so if you do want to get further information, please drop us an email. Someone asks, do children homes and buildings with occasional sleeping where children are assessed fall under the regulations?
I don't think that falls within a residential definition. But children's homes might if they fall within other aspects of HRB regulations, but occasional sleeping isn't residential. Is my understanding. Mark?
That's got me completely. That's one of those questions where I'd need to go away and read it in detail. My instinct says no, but I'm sufficiently that's a real left field question. Thank you for that one.
It is. Thank you. Can I just introduce a caveat to my answer then? Subject to checking.
Whoever wrote that, because you submitted it anonymously, if you want to drop us an email, we'd be more than happy to give you a fuller answer. Agita, there's good afternoon. You mentioned that hotels are exempt. Would this exemption still apply if an owner is proposing to establish a new hotel within a high-risk building containing 7 floors and more than 2 residential units?
That was my caveat to you. Pick up the regulations and the guidance to the regulations, because there can be buildings that meet the height condition, but because of the way they're divided up and the division, the access to the different parts is different, can mean it isn't an HRB when you think it is, and vice versa. There's a building that's largely something, but then has a residential element that makes the whole building a high-risk building. But it tends to be only the bits that fall within. So the hospital, although it's the hotel, although it's in a high-risk building, doesn't fall within the provisions. It's incredibly complicated, but that's not even true. That relates to occupation, but relating to construction, generally speaking, where the building is connected, even if there is not a high-risk building within the high-risk element, then the whole building tends to be a high-risk building. So I think under the 120D, where you have that situation, you're probably right. The whole building is a high-risk building. But it's every one of these cases is very specific, and you have to read the regulations and you have to understand it, and it depends how the access works and the definition. I say different between occupation and construction.
Yeah, introducing a hotel into an HRB would have material changes to the fire escape arrangements, I would imagine, and would impact the fire risk assessment for the building and so on. So I think that although hotels are exempt, other things would come into
if
play.
I give it a scenario of a new building, and we're not talking about new buildings, that we did look in a huge amount of detail. There is an office block that was on a common podium, a common basement, and on the other side, on the same basement, was a higher risk building, clearly higher risk building. So during occupation, one HRB, one office block. During construction, that was one HRB because they were physically connected by the basement and they had shared services. So you can drag things into that overarching definition by the way they're physically connected.
Thank you very much, gents. Christopher has a comment followed by a question. So Christopher, his personal opinion is that he thinks it's ridiculous that there aren't going to be any templates or checklists, etc., issued regarding the documents required for an application. Do you think wouldn't it assist everyone if there was a robust advice and guidance available, especially as this is a new process? Do you have any thoughts?
I partly disagree and I partly agree. Templates in this context are really unhelpful because it's about the process. In any part of building safety, be it occupation safety cases, be it construction control plans, all of this thing, the process is king. You have to develop a process, and that process will be bespoke to the team, to the client, and the client needs to work out what good looks like. And there are infinite number of ways of what good looks like. So once you've worked that out for your team, then it writes itself. So to give somebody a template, they'll do what everybody does, fill the template up with loads of rubbish and hopes it gets past the regulator. And that's not what this is about. About providing information, yeah, it's absolutely torturous that we don't know what, apart from what I've just told you today. But I was told it by a very, very significant individual, and then I was immediately contradicted by somebody else who said, "Oh yes, but somebody else really significant said something slightly different." Now that really is not helpful. It's not helpful at all, and we need some clarity. But they are in a problem in that, as they said, this is the biggest project that the HSE has ever done, setting this up, and one of the biggest government projects there has ever been. And they are just struggling to get everything up and running at the speed that it needs to. So to a degree, I have sympathy, and a lot of I don't have sympathy. You know, it's criminal law. You need to give us some clarity, please. It's costing everybody thousands, nay, millions. You need to give us some clarity. Andrew?
Back to the previous question. Yeah, the problem with a template is the implication is it is a pro forma and a tick box. If the template was in fact more along the terms of a guidance or a specification that could then be cherry picked to make it appropriate to the project in question, that's a possible way forward. But a pro forma document that somebody just writes wee bits of information into, I don't think is appropriate.
I'll just look sideways, and the next question is, but there's some new guidance that came in yesterday, and I was told of yesterday, but I can't even think what it is. It's relevant, and I have not even read it, but keep asking the questions, and I'll try to do two jobs at once.
Fantastic. That always facilitates great answers. Brian asks, could you please expand on the definition of higher risk buildings and any relevant procedures?
The definition of high risk buildings is, as we said right at the beginning, 18 meters, 7 stories, and of a definition specified in the regulations, which relating to building works is a building with 2 or more residential units, a care home within the meaning of the Care Services Act, and a hospital within the meaning of the
Yeah, I think I could have answered that one, to be fair.
Regulation that I can't remember at this time, that has at least one bed for overnight use.
Okay, next question. Timothy asks, just to confirm, is it the APS's view that a construction control plan would be good practice for all building regulations projects, not just HRBs? Best wishes.
Yes. Yes, I really passionately, profoundly believe that because the client needs arrangements for any projects under building regs part 2A. They need suitable arrangements, and how that's described is what you need. It's, how do you check the competence of people? How do you make sure everybody's competent? What's the process for making sure your design is compliant? What's your process for turning that compliant design into a compliant building? How do you make sure everybody cooperates together? At its essence, that's what every project needs. And if you're a corporate client with a number of projects or a number of buildings, then to have a consistent construction control plan. That also, I suppose the other piece was and how do you evidence it? That's incredibly important, that you have a process that delivers you the assurance. And what we haven't talked about today is that client's declaration on the completion certificate, is you sign that completion certificate at the end saying, as a client, I believe that the building complies with the requirements of the building regs. Wow, that's a big statement. Giving false or misleading evidence, 2 years in prison, unlimited fine. You're going to want to have a lot of evidence to make that signature.
There's another aspect to this, and that is the definition of higher risk buildings within the regulations is narrowly focused on, and as defined by Mark, but on residential buildings. It doesn't, by any stretch of the imagination, cover all buildings that contain higher risks. And I think to add to what Mark said, that a change construction control plan is something that I was working on in practice before the regulations come out in certain types of buildings, because it was absolutely necessary. And so I agree that some form of construction control plan appropriate in detail to the size, scope, context of the building project is probably part of good practice anyway.
Thank you so much.
Right, I've just sent you two links. I think I've sent you 2 links. I might have just sent you 1 link of the 2. Yeah,
it's just 1 link at the moment.
I have to work out what the other one was.
No worries. Shall I jump into the questions again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Michael asks, are you aware of a template being set up to cover all aspects of the process associated with HRBs that consultants, clients, contractors can follow? There just seem to be quite a few questions on templates and forms.
I think we've answered that in the earlier discussion. And no, I'm not aware of a template that covers all aspects of the process.
Okay.
I have lots and lots of diagrams, and they're all included in the training. But it's too complicated. It's so much interrelated, and it all relates to how do you want to go about doing it. I mean, even how do you design an organization to deliver the role of PD building regulations? Andrew and I have been trying to work out what that looks like relating to organizational capability. Every organization will do it slightly different. And that's just one bit of the organizational structure and competence. And then you take that and put that in a wider context. You probably do have a fire engineer, but are they separate companies? How many companies have you got? How is this a competent client that has their own QA? Who does QA? How are you going to deal with the QA issue? Quality assurance. Every project will look differently.
Thank you so much. Well, one person asked, and I'll be honest, I was going to ask this at one point as well, because it does fluctuate, and it might just be the way you're both saying it. Is it high risk or higher risk building?
Higher risk. Higher risk.
Honestly, it sounds like you're saying the same thing. So has it got an ER at the end?
ER, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And 2 people that answered that, asked that as well. I'm just going to put that in. Zoe says, if you are a hospital...
although I'll give you a little bit of word of warning, and I've just looked sideways at the government guidance from the BSR. they are still, as of yesterday, calling it high-rise building, and that is just wrong. High-rise buildings relates to the Fire Safety England regulations. They know it. I've had discussions with them, but I think they've made the mistake and don't know how to reverse out of it.
Zoe asks, if you are a hospital and use HTMs as your compliance standard, what happens if there is a derogation from these standards? How will this be seen by the BSR? Will it still be accepted as a compliant application?
I don't know enough about that to respond. Mark, do you?
A derogation. The honest answer with all of this is you need to make an application that makes a case to the regulator that what you're proposing is coherent and compliant, and they will judge it on that basis. It's literally an exam. You put in your evidence and say, I believe that is my answer to the question, and they'll look at it and say, I'm, as a registered inspector, I have the facts I've got in front of me. I've got a fire engineer to my left, and I've got other specialists to my right, and then we will look at that and we'll make a decision as to whether we believe it's compliant. And that's how it is now. And there is no negotiation. You just have to put it in there. If you believe it's compliant, then you've done enough. I said to the other day, I used to train a lot and talk about health and safety. Have you done enough, or justify your position to the judge? It's all gone wrong. Can you justify your position? And if you can, you've done enough. And if you can't, you haven't. It's like this: is get a colleague to look at it and say, well, I think that's compliant. And if they look at it and go, yeah, I'm happy with that. I think you've convinced me that you've given it. It's probably okay. But if you're standing there thinking, feel a bit uncomfortable about that, I don't know we've quite justified our position on that. Trust me, the regulator probably will feel the same way.
Thank you ever so much. Zoe also asks, can you please clarify as-built drawing requirements upon completions? Are most projects we only receive as recorded drawings?
This is
yeah, carry on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's I don't know if Marcus is going to say it's an old chestnut, but
yeah.
As built, it's been used in CDM, it's been used in the building regulations. It's quite difficult to get as built because the designers will very rarely produce them. As you say, Zoe, you get various permutations of as recorded. You get final control issue, final construction issue, all the rest of it. The reason for that is that designers are not supervising the work in general. The expectation, I think, is that the contractor will contribute and provide as-builts. Of course.
Can I jump in, Andrew?
Yeah, you can.
I was just going to say something relating to this. Is that there was conversation on my Strat T on Monday about designers being involved in inspection and approval. And then we were talking about this idea of, can't you have a template? There may be a client that says, because the client needs to provide evidence that this building was built properly. Designers designed it to a particular standard. There may be a client that says, actually, I need to achieve a record of that it was compliant at the end. And one of those processes is involving the designer in that inspection, so that when we get to the end, that they can issue those drawings called as built. We are in a different world. Whatever may have happened in the past is not relevant to this discussion. We can't has got nothing to do with it, is you are a client, you are carrying out work on an existing HRB, you will need to evidence your position. What does that look like? Make it up, make sure it works, and then write it in a construction control plan.
Yep. And so the issue really is getting everybody within the industry to bite into that and change their processes so that there is evidence. And what we're talking about is evidence of design compliance and build compliance with building regulations. It's not there yet, though, I don't think. And I would expect professional bodies to be able to jump in and by professional bodies, I mean in design and construction sides of the industry, to jump in to make sure that this is covered adequately.
Thank you ever so much. We're just going to go to the final 9. I'm going to turn off questions for a bit, if that's okay, everyone, just so we can jump through it. So Dorota asks, who is responsible for alerting clients of their duties under BSA, particularly if inexperienced clients?
Designers, statutory duties, and contractors have a statutory duty to ensure the client is aware of their duties. Now, it's a discussion often. You can say to the client, "Are you aware of their duties?" And they go, "No," and you can go, "All right then," but you can't do anything. So, are you going to tell them, or are you going to get somebody to tell them or point them in the right direction? But the long and short of it, if you just sit staring at them and don't tell them anything, you can't start. So it's probably a good idea that
Be
you
best to tell
understand.
them.
Best tell them what it is, and then you can get going.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gary asked, notice to commence work. Is this something similar to an F10 notification required by CDM regulations?
No.
Wonderful. Any further?
That was maybe too brief, Tommy. No, it will be. It is a notification, but it has different purpose and different detail attached to it.
Fantastic. Javid asks, does a hospital really need to wait 8 weeks for a completion certificate taking into account emergency beds and installation of medical equipment such as MRIs, etc., before occupation?
It is what it is. I'm not sure that it was quite intended, but it is what it is. And the real difficulty, it's the definition. We give you this simple definition of what an HRB is, but the problem is what defines a building. So there is a building, there's a hospital in the southwest where the central core meets the height condition, but it's surrounded by a lot of lower buildings. But because of the way the hospital is configured, in other words, it's one common entry or a number of common entrances to access it all. The whole hospital, and almost the whole hospital, has become an HRB. So whatever you do onto that building, I suspect I've heard regulators suggesting some things are and some things aren't, and I think that as they discover the problems in the system, that things might change. I mean, the difficulty, I hear messages either directly from the regulator or from people who heard from the regulator, and things are moving. The law is clear, but there are some unintended consequences in this, and things are just moving to try to make this work.
Thank you. Gary asks, could you please define minor works in relations to HRBs?
No, there isn't anything as minor works. We've got exempt works, we've got emergency works, we've got scheme work, we've got type A and type B work. We don't have anything called minor works. If the building regulations apply, those are your different options, and there will be exempt works, which you might call minor works, but it isn't called minor works, it's called exempt works.
Yeah, I think I mentioned minor works because I get asked the question quite often by members who are doing a small alteration to an HRB, and they invariably ask, do I need to inform the regulator? And what I have described in my answer is if the minor works require building control applications to be made, then yes, building control procedures need to be followed within the HRB.
Thank you so much. William asks, clients have confusion regarding the role of PD. Many are assuming the same as CDM PD. Do you have any suggestions or references to explain this, as they are default assuming that we will take the role?
APS is, Mark and I, representing APS, are designing a client guide, and it's been drafted and that will be issued, and it will helpfully guide clients through their requirements. We already produce a client guide for CDM clients, There is confusion out there. It's really up to the designers to explain to the client not only their duties, but their own capabilities in relation to delivering the PD roles.
Thank you. Philip says, if you have a HRB linked to a non-HRB via a link bridge, does the smaller building become part of the HRB? Does the length of the link bridge make a difference?
I think Mark's answered this in his previous response on the hospital, which is an HRB surrounded by lots of lower rise buildings. The answer is yes, it's connected. It becomes an HRB during construction unless one element of it becomes, as we've described earlier, a hotel. So one bit of it remains residential. The link bridge then goes to a hotel. Then in occupation, the two parts of the building would have a different definition.
Yeah, I really can't commend the HRB descriptions and supplementary provisions regulations to you enough, and the guidance that goes with it. The answer to all of your questions is in there. It's not easy, and there's the one that I really completely phased me when everything told me it was an HRB and it wasn't, which was where the semi-basement access was via a different door. I read it and I read it and I read it, and each time I got the answer I didn't want to get, and you'll find that when you start reading it, it'll blow your mind. You think this is easy? Read those regs.
I don't think this is easy. Philip says, I'm confused by the differences in the definition of building work in the amended building regs and the exemptions listed in Schedule 2 of the HRB procedures regs. They don't quite tally. Do you have any comments on applying standard definitions which match both requirements?
Well, the definition of building work hasn't changed. It is what it is. Schedule 2 in the building HRB regs relates to work which is exempt from the requirements of the building HRB regs. And whether that aligns with, I haven't actually done the alignment piece between the schedule and the building regs, but when I've had a quick look at them, they seem to be broadly aligned. There's different, I don't know, if it's exempt if it's exempt, it's exempt. You don't need to worry about it. And if it's a requirement of the building regs, you do. And if they don't quite align, I'm not sure there's a problem. Is there, Andrew?
I don't think so. I was summarizing in my head, but I'll just say it: horses for courses, isn't it? The exemptions will apply relative to the regulations that they're written into.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Neil says, where an existing complex bespoke listed building refurbishment project has developed bespoke approaches under building regs compliance in agreement with the BC officer under the previous regime, how likely are these to be unpicked in the transition to the new regime? PC is still a long way off.
It probably won't transition if the work started through to transition. It doesn't transfer unless you have to look at the transitional arrangements, and on the face of that doesn't transfer. You know, it is under the existing regime, will continue to be. If that building regulator went out of business, or building control authority went out of business, and I don't know if it's private or local authority, then it could transfer. But if it's part of the transitional arrangements, then that won't occur.
Yeah.
So some of these questions are so detailed, relating to a specific set of circumstances, and both, you know, how does this building apply? Does it apply? Does it not? It's not simple. And as relating to transitional arrangements, it's not simple. You just have to follow the transitional arrangements, and they themselves aren't easy. And as I say to anybody, even when I do know the answer and give them the advice, seek advice from a lawyer. Because trust me, I'm not putting my PI on the line to when I'm not covered for it.
Okay, we'll end it there. Thank you ever so much, Mark and Andrew.